Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. I may have a few issues here that we need to work out. The time locally is 8:55 a.m. Pacific time here in Ellensburg, Washington. Welcome to my backyard. My name is Nick Zentner, and since we're a few minutes ahead, I'm hoping to correct a few issues that we may have. First of all, am I live streaming successfully through the Learning Geology page? And second of all, am I backwards on is the text backwards or is it frontwards? Is it readable for you? Those are the two main concerns. Otherwise, words are backwards. Okay. Let me see if a couple other people have that, but I'm guessing that's the case. Text is backwards, yes or no? Quite a delay. Yeah, okay, good. All right, so how about that? How are we doing with the text now? Is the text forwards or backwards, or readable or unreadable? There's a delay in the comments. I'm still seeing a bunch of backwards, but I hope that's not the case currently. Hey man, I need somebody to say this text looks good. Otherwise, I'm going to start to... Kasim, am I streaming properly for you? And is the text readable? David, great. Boy, there's quite a delay here. Thurston, can't thank you enough. Text is forward. Special shout out to Thurston. Okay, good. Oh, I'm pleased. I'm pleased. Let me get a few things set up here. I'll grab some coffee and we'll be off and running. Just kidding. Oh man, I couldn't get the phone to go landscape for like 5 minutes in there. All sorts of stuff, man. This keeps me alive. Woo! Keeps me alive. Keeps me going. We might even wait a couple extra minutes. It feels like people are just kind of rolling in here, and I think we might do that. But since things are looking okay, yeah, the Jays are going nuts this morning. Get out of here. I mean, I love birds. I love you. Here's the local time. Welcome. We'll start in, let's say, 3 more minutes. How about that? 3 more minutes-ish. Let me tell you a quick little story before we begin. Also as a way to test everything, make sure we're doing okay. There's something called the Geological Society of America. They have a meeting every year, a big one, and then they have sectional meetings in the springtime. But the big one, the big national meeting, the international meeting is every fall. And I don't usually go to those, but occasionally I go, and I went to the one in Phoenix last fall. And it's always interesting when you go to those because a lot of geologists from all over the world have a certain look often. The look is changing, but for years it was old white guys with beards and khakis and plaid shirts, and they're all marching around. They got their Brunton on their belt, and even though they're in downtown Philadelphia, So anyway, things are changing, and that's great. Much more diverse. Many different smart people from all over the place. Great. But one common thing that still remains is a lot of geologists, especially field geologists, are quite introverted people. And so it's always fascinating to me that there's a lot of people just kind of sitting by themselves, kind of reading their program or working on their laptop, or it's just kind of a solitary thing. So that includes me, by the way, even though I'm kind of plugged in and effervescent when the cameras are rolling. Otherwise, I'm a pretty quiet person. So I was sitting by myself in Phoenix in September, and this young man came up and said, "Excuse me, I think I recognize your face." And I'm like, "Hey." And he's like, "I'm the guy from Pakistan that runs Learning Geology." And I'm like, "Hey, I'm impressed with you. Mohammed Qasim Mahood." He's run this Facebook page for 3 years or so. It's an amazing community. It's a great resource. And I felt an instant connection to Qasim. That was my only time visiting with him face to face, and then I escaped him yesterday as we were kind of troubleshooting and getting this going. And fine young man, and hoping to continue in graduate school with an emphasis on science communication. So, are you looking for a crackerjack young person who's driven to be the best he can be? Learning Geology, the guy behind the landlord, the godfather of Learning Geology Facebook page. Check him out. Talk to him. All right, I'm seeing all sorts of emojis flying. They're flying too fast for me to even understand. There's also some mad ones. You're already mad? Oh, because I haven't started? All right. Once we get to 300, we'll start. How about that? Is that a deal? Call up Shirley next door and have her tune in. We'll get to 300. Hey, 302. Well, a pleasant good morning to you all from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. My name is Nick Zettner, and I teach geology here at a little college in town. The college has about 15 students. The college has about 15,000 students in a normal situation, but these are not normal times. We all know that. So we're 100% online this quarter, as many universities are around the world. And there's about 15,000 people that live in this town of Ellensburg, Washington. We're about 2 hours from Seattle by car, but we go up and over the mountains to get to Seattle. And on our side of the mountains, it's actually dry. It's a desert. There's sagebrush and blue skies. And it's a totally different climate than what you maybe are aware of with Seattle, Washington. So Washington is a very diverse state. What's the title of today's session? It's clever. All right. I'm here on purpose. I live here on purpose. I'm not from Washington. I grew up in Wisconsin. But when I found this geology thing in college, and I actually worked in Glacier Park in Montana as a college kid, pumping gas at Lake McDonald Lodge, and I went on day hikes and I discovered geology here in the Pacific Northwest. I was impressed, I was moved, I was ready to jump into Geology 101 in 1984, and I've been in it ever since. And I've been teaching here in Washington State for 30 years now. And I love it, and I continue to love it, and I have lots of practice communicating what's here with an audience. Originally, it was people here. I was talking to people here. It's like, yeah, you know Saddle Mountains? Well, there's more to the story than you think about Saddle Mountains, or Republic, or Snoqualmie Pass, or Renton, or Ellensburg, or Menashtash Canyon. These are sacred places to many of us. And I use that word on purpose. Of course, we've had people here for thousands of years where there was an amazing connection to the landscape. There's different folks now, but we also have a way to connect with these landscapes. So my plan today, especially if you haven't been to my backyard before, I've been doing live streams for a few weeks now, it seems, a few months, few years, I don't know. I think St. Patrick's Day was our first one, and today's April 11th. So I do 5 of these a week just to keep myself busy. So you're welcome, if you haven't found these before, to keep coming back to the backyard here. I'll do one tomorrow morning. I'll tell you about that in a bit. Oh, no, I'll tell you about it now. So if you enjoyed today, please come back tomorrow. Please come back tomorrow. Easter Sunday. Not the norm, is it? But Easter Sunday, if you're feeling like you want to spend an hour with me here in the backyard in Ellensburg, Washington, tune in at 9 o'clock local time, 9 a.m. Pacific, and we'll talk about supervolcanoes, a topic that has worldwide appeal. But I'm afraid you're not going to come back here to the Learning Geology Facebook page. To find the rest of these live streams, you'll have to go to my YouTube channel. Nick Zettner is my name. My YouTube channel, you'll find it. I think I call this series Nick from Home. So type in Nick from Home, you'll find a bunch that we've already done, and that's the plan. Okay, you ready to get to work? I think my hope here is to communicate with people of all ages from many different places around the globe. And I'm going to assume this morning that you've never been to Washington State, not Washington, D.C. That's a totally different world. Washington State, we're on the other coast. We're on the west coast of North America. We call it the Pacific Northwest. And I'm going to be doing my best to share with you why this is such a special place. And it's not a competition. I'm sure your place has wonderful geology as well, whatever country you're in. We don't need a scorecard, do we? Maybe that's just an American thing where we always have to rate everything. But it's not a competition, but I'm here on purpose because of all this amazing geology in one place. And my dinky little town, Ellensburg, Washington, is uniquely set up to go in all these directions and visit all these things. So people of all ages, people of all countries, I'm talking to you, whether you end up here at some point or not. I hope when all this is over and you can fly anywhere you want, you fly up here and you visit us. And I'm hoping to share with you what's here. Last preamble comment. I will do some live Q&A, but I do want to share a fair amount with you ahead of time. So I'm thinking 25 minutes of me talking to you. And I'm not even going to look at the comments here. I can see these comments scrolling through, but I'm not even going to look at them because I got to concentrate on what I'm doing. And I'll give you the high sign. I don't know, should we have a sign? Okay, that's the sign that we're done with me talking, and this means we're ready for you to ask questions, especially folks that have never joined us before. I'm particularly interested in answering your questions. But of course, anybody's welcome to ask a question. Okie dokie, let's do it. Hopefully this text is readable. This is a whiteboard. And this is how I have decided that I want to break up my little 25-minute section with you and give you a little taste of each of these items that are on display here in Washington State. It's quite a surplus of concepts, and some of them are actually dangerous. Like we're worried about something happening and harming some of our residents. And we don't want to overplay that, especially in these times that we're living in currently. But there's not only cute stories from the past where you can get all tucked in bed and I can tell you a little story about what happened long ago, and I can also talk about stuff that's coming in our future and what we know about that. So I'm happy to go anywhere you want to go when we get to the Q&A, whether it's on this list or whether it's off topic and you think it's related somehow to Washington State. But I'm going to roll through each of these from bottom to top. These are roughly organized from oldest to youngest. Okay? Before we do that, let's give you a quick geography lesson. Might as well just use this. What the heck? So we'll come back to this for other... No, this is not the best. If only I had a chalkboard here, I could draw it. Screw it. I'm gonna draw it. All right. So let's make a map of the American states out here in the West to make sure we know where we're talking about. Guy's going to talk for 25 minutes. Or are you spending 5 minutes cleaning the board? Like this is never going to be 25 minutes. I know what you're thinking. Just give me a chance. I'm a pro. Happy little Montana. Okay, this is the Pacific Northwest. British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Alberta up in British Columbia. Where are we? We're right there. Center of the state of Washington. This is called Central Washington University. Now, being this far west on the continent of North America means there's a lot of active geology. Well, why is that? Why is Washington a more active geologic place than any other place in North America? Or why are some states in the U.S. way more interesting and diverse geologically than, say, Wisconsin, where I grew up? Wonderful people. My mother and my cousins live there, my sisters. But it's not the place to be for geology, if you ask me. There goes my map. It's getting blown into the Columbia River. People of all ages, you've seen a map like this. It's a map of the world, but it shows plate boundaries. It shows tectonic plates and it shows tectonic plate boundaries. And I want you to notice that Washington State is very close to one of those plate boundaries. And the general relationship is the closer you are to a plate boundary, the more action you will receive. And so if you're an anxious person and you're worried about earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happening in your backyard, then I suppose you want to drive as quickly as possible to the middle of one of these tectonic plates, because generally the closer you are to the center of a tectonic plate, the more boring things are geologically. So I grew up here, and when I discovered geology and decided I want to teach geology, I drove towards the edge of the North American plate. What does that look like? This is a beautiful illustration by Cynthia Shaw, who lives just a couple hours away, and it shows in a beautiful artistic way all the things that are happening here in the Pacific Northwest, or at least many of them. You can see a divergent plate boundary called the Juan de Fuca Ridge offshore. You can see a moving ocean plate called the Juan de Fuca Plate. You can see that that ocean plate is actually diving beneath Washington. Of course, it's Oregon and Northern California as well, but I'll just say Washington. And then you can see that the Olympic Peninsula along the coast has some very complicated rock. You can see that there's a bunch of orange stuff here, which is magma coming up from the subduction zone and fueling the Cascade volcanoes. You can see to Ellensburg. So Ellensburg is right here. Actually, I think the name Ellensburg is on her map. Thank you, Cynthia. And you can see there's some other lavas that are making a huge pile in eastern Washington. And by the time we get over to this edge of this map, we're finally to the old part of North America. Okay, how am I going to do this in just a few minutes? I have a plan. Instead of taking the time to draw everything out longhand, because I do want to get to your questions, I'm just trying to prime the pump so that you can be on point with what you want to ask about. I took a little time this morning trying to draw out some concepts that we want to deal with. And so this is kind of a little place we can go, combined with this. So we could do a full class on this, we could do a full 4-year geology program on this, and we still would not really scratch the surface of all the details going on. Okay, let's get right to it. Roll call. If we go back to the earliest days of the Pacific Northwest, we're way down here at the bottom. And you might recognize this name. This is a supercontinent called Pangaea, which was together globally between 300 and 200 million years ago. First major point, when we're back at Pangaea time, there was no Washington. The edge or the coast of Pangaea was at Spokane, Washington. So this is Pangaea, a portion of Pangaea, of course. Pangaea was what? It was a time when the Earth had one continent and one ocean. One supercontinent and one super ocean. And the supercontinent existed, and this was the edge of Pangaea. So this was open ocean, deep ocean. There was no Ellensburg. Oh, that was covered with a little bit of water? No, there was no land. Deep ocean. Okay. So this is the coast of Pangaea as recently as 200 million years ago. But are you aware that there are older supercontinents that we know about now? Like if you know about Pangaea, do you realize that the globe is round? Not flat? And that if you have this globe and you have a supercontinent and you break up the supercontinent, those continental scraps are going to eventually hook back up and have another party. And then that supercontinent will split up and those continents will get back together and have another little party. So as we go further back in time, we have less and less evidence to reconstruct the details of those supercontinents, but we do know that, let's just pick three. So we know of a supercontinent, Columbia, sometimes called Nunya. Break that up more than 1 billion years ago. Make a younger supercontinent called Rodinia. And break up Rodinia 750 million years ago, and then make Pangaea. So I've not only drawn for you the coastline of Pangaea, I've also conveniently drawn for you at John Stockton's house in Spokane, Washington, a place where a continent used to be sitting here during Rodinia time. I'm saying 1 billion years ago, this was old North America, and this was Australia. Most geologists say Australia. Some say China. Some say Antarctica. Somebody was here, though. Siberia, some say. But the point is, if we're back at Rodinia time, just pick a number, 1 billion years ago, we have all sorts of evidence in the geologic rock record. I don't know why I stumbled on that. We have rocks to prove to us that there used to be a continent docked right here, and 750 million years ago, Australia pulled away from us, or we pulled away from Australia. Whatever, there was a rift, and open ocean started, and then suddenly we have open ocean until 300 million years ago, Pangaea. 200 million years ago, Pangaea starts to break apart, and in the last 200 million years, pieces of land started showing up. Pieces of land called exotic terrains. Each of these is an exotic terrain. Pieces of land that were not made in their present location. And when this was first discovered in the 1980s, people assumed, well, I don't know, we know about plate tectonics now. We know the Farallon plate used to be coming at North America for a long time. They thought was at the time. So I guess these are pieces of land that came from across the Pacific. I'm here in your program, exotic terrains. A new idea, actually it's not a new idea, it was first proposed 50 years ago, but it's new in the sense that there's much more evidence that there was 50 million years ago for this. So are you watching in Pakistan right now? Are you watching in Chad? Are you watching in Japan? Have you heard about something called Baja BC? I'm guessing not. But it's an amazing concept that was originally thought of as an absolute clown show and now appears to be real for many of us. A whole number of these exotic terrains, which are now in Washington, British Columbia, and even Alaska, we're pretty sure now were originally down in Mexico. Baja BC, a bunch of exotic terrains that were originally in Mexico are now up here. Baja to British Columbia. And that impacts Washington because a lot of local landmarks, including Mount Stewart, this is 93 million year old granodiorite from Mount Stewart. It's a mountain I'm pointing to right now. It's visible from our neighborhood. It's a beautiful mountain. And this rock, if you're a Baja BC person, we realize this rock formed in Mexico. and got moved almost 2,000 miles to the north along something like the San Andreas Fault. So Baja, BC, Mexico is down here, right here. No, it's down here. And we're gonna somehow move exotic terrains up the old west coast of North America and get them to British Columbia. You might have questions about that. You know, put them, scratch them down. Are you an old school person? Are you an analog person? Pencil, paper? Jot down a couple questions. We'll get to your live questions in just a bit. We got to move on though. We jump now to 40 million years ago. So we went from more than 1 billion years ago to 200 million years ago when Pangaea starts to break apart, to assembling terrains and having some of them being moved north from Mexico between 85 and 55 million years ago. Now we're going to start the Cascade volcanoes and something called the clockwise rotation at the same time, starting roughly 40 million years ago. By the way, before I leave exotic terrains, are you aware that all 7 continents have an old portion, commonly called a craton, with a platform on top? And then there are exotic terrains on the east margin of North America, basically between the east of the Appalachians. And then I was just talking about these exotic terrains here. So we accumulated exotic terrains on the east coast of North America as we were heading toward colliding with Europe and Africa to make Pangaea. And then in the last 200 million years ago, we started putting it in reverse, you know, over and down, reverse. And North America starts going west, and we start accumulating all these bugs on our windshield, exotic terrains. And we build the state of Washington that way. Feeling okay? Okay. We're jumping now to the Cascades, which I've already showed you is a quite simple convergent plate boundary, ocean plate subducting beneath continent, and we're generating these absolutely wonderful volcanoes. But the volcanoes, and you've heard of some of them, even if you're a long way away from us. Mount St. Helens you've heard of, that erupted in 1980. Mount Rainier you probably have heard of. Maybe you've heard of some others. Mount Hood, Crater Lake. These are national parks here in the U.S. They're heavily visited, and they're beautiful places to visit. We have Cascade volcanism here only because we have this ocean plate diving beneath Washington. So you can see these incredible volumes of magma that are being generated continuously, and as long as we have subduction of that ocean plate, we will continue to have volcanism. Yes, I'm talking about our future, not just our past. And you're like, oh, that'll be fun. We can watch Mount Rainier erupt. I guess I'll get the lawn chair, I'll get a nice 6-pack of beer, and we'll have a great time. We'll get Rainier beer and watch Rainier erupt. Well, yeah, that might be the case. But there is a problem. We now know, this is all based on wonderful geology work done here in the western U.S. in the last 100 years or so. We now know that there are times when a cone volcano like Mount Rainier erupts, but there's amazing flows that travel tens of miles down river valleys and harm people. Volcanic hazards. In this case, I'm showing you. This phone is reversed, so I'm moving the wrong way because I'm backwards as I'm looking at it. Just a little inside info there. So what we're looking at is the Osceola mud flow. What you see here in yellow are places where we had volcanic mud flows happening in the past. And my main point is you can be a major metropolitan area like Tacoma and the state capital of Washington called Olympia, and even up towards Seattle, Washington. And many of those subdivisions, many of those towns and high schools and everything else are built on volcanic mud flows from Mount Rainier. And you're like, I don't get it. It's not lava? No, it's volcanic mud. It's basically a portion of a cone volcano that fails, becomes a landslide. The landslide converts into a lahar, And it's not just here in Washington, of course. We've had fatal effects of Lahars all around the world. So I always have to pick the right tone here, don't I? It's exciting. It's exciting to see this geology in action. It's exciting to have things happening on the planet today that we can study to better help us understand the past. That's all what uniformitarianism is about. But with some of this stuff, we're talking about human suffering. So you can't be too excited because there's families involved. Okay. Now I'm slowing my pace down and thinking about all that, and that's sad. And it's already 9:30, so I'm going to finish up with, this is all just a little sampler plate to get to our Q&A with you, especially people who have never thought about Washington geology before. Where are we? So that's 40 million years of Cascade volcanism. Clockwise rotation is a concept that was discovered really just in the last 15 years because we have now a dense network of GPS receivers that are anchored into bedrock in the Pacific Northwest, and they have revealed to us this amazing rotation of all the crust in the Pacific Northwest. And this is a beautiful illustration of that from Bob Butler at University of Portland. And it looks like I'm going to do something really fun with a pop-up book, but it's not really that. It's kind of disappointing, but I'll do it anyway. Here's what's been going on in the last 40 million years. I'm trying to get rid of the glare for you. Let me do it again. So we have a block of California's crust being moved north along the San Andreas Fault. That block goes into the Western Oregon block. That block goes into southwestern Washington. And everything gets stopped to a halt up in British Columbia and northern Washington. And because of that, we have a whole collection of faults and folds. I'll show it to you from the side. We actually make ridges in central Washington by doing that compression. So of course it's not doing this, doink, 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 doink. It's just doing a gradual, steady, clockwise rotation of the western parts of these states. And we have not only developing folds and incised river canyons here, but we also have earthquakes tied to that squeezing. Most famously the Seattle Fault, but plenty of other faults throughout central Washington. Keep it going. We're almost to present day. We got 3 more to go. About 16 million years ago, we had a freak show. We had freakish lavas, each lava flow like Hawaii, but each lava flow 50 feet thick. And that lava flooded a large portion of our state. So this yellow, an unfortunate color in my opinion, but this yellow is the area over here, I'm not flipping you off, where a bunch of complicated geology in Washington was buried by those lavas. And those lavas buried everything roughly 16 million years ago. Here's what those lavas look like today. They're called flood basalts. You maybe know of flood basalts where you are. Are you in Siberia? Are you in India? We have flood basalts. We haven't cornered the market on flood basalts, but there was so much basalt that came out in such a short amount of time that the weight of that German chocolate cake just depressed the crust, caused the former land surface to sink 3 miles in the middle of this German chocolate cake. So you might be curious about why the lavas came out of the ground, why it was the Hawaiian lavas and not something else. And talk about freak shows. Now we're to the Ice Age, and I'm about done with my little program. There are places on top of the German chocolate cake that we now realize were significantly flooded by water. And this is a wonderful a whole series of posters done by Daniel Coe at the Washington Geological Survey. I haven't shown this one before from my backyard. And we have this imagery now where we can actually see this water. These are the Missoula Floods I'm talking about, the Ice Age floods, made famous by a gentleman named J. Harlan Bretz. And between J. Harlan Bretz and Brian Atwater, who's with us today, those are the two most famous geologists here in the Pacific Northwest. So Brett spent a whole career finding evidence for this. Here's another way to look at that same story. So now we're to the Ice Age. We're in the last 2 million years of time. We're towards the top of my whiteboard. And what else do we have in Washington? We have an ice sheet creeping down from Canada. We have major glacial lakes. No big whoop, no big deal. We got a bunch of glacial lakes where we've ponded that fresh water that's coming off the melting ice. But the big whoop, the excitement is we have clear evidence of times when an ice dam in northern Idaho failed. And we suddenly drained the water of Glacial Lake Missoula in just a few days. That lake dumped into Glacial Lake Columbia. That was a full bathtub. So now we're spilling a bunch of that water over eastern Washington where those dark gray places are. And there's overwhelming evidence, compiled mostly by J. Harlan Bretz 100 years ago, that these were cataclysmic, catastrophic floods of unimaginable amounts of water. Like, you've got a river canyon, we've got 1,000 feet of water moving at least 40 miles an hour, at least 40 miles an hour down your river valley. You're like, baloney, how do you know that? Well, there's all these pieces of field evidence, including piles of river gravels that are hundreds of feet high, places where the bedrock has been ripped up by that water, and potholes have been drilled, and old waterfalls that have been migrated because the erosive power of the water. We have slack water sediments downstream that talk about all the soil that got picked up. We're still talking about Washington. All this stuff within an hour and a half drive of this backyard that I'm speaking to you from. Preposition at the end. The last thing. So flood basalts, and then right on top of the flood basalts, these Ice Age floods, making the Grand Coulee and other famous places like Dry Falls. Brian Atwater, who I mentioned, is a geologist who was as visionary and as hardworking and as important as J. Harlan Bretz 100 years before him. And Atwater was able to realize flood basalts, ice sheet, we just talked about it. Now look carefully back. This is the last thing I'm doing, by the way. Look carefully back at this thing. You've heard about great earthquakes, perhaps. Now there's lots of different kinds of earthquakes, lots of different magnitudes, lots of different effects on society. But the great earthquakes are the magnitude 9 earthquakes. The biggest earthquakes possible generated by planet Earth. And those great earthquakes, which are also part of our story here in Washington, which we didn't know about when I started my teaching career here 30 years ago. We didn't know about the great earthquakes, but we now do because of this work by Atwater and friends. And these biggest of all earthquakes are generated only right at the trench, right at the oceanic trench. And this area becomes locked and loaded like a spring, and then suddenly it unlocks after hundreds of years of stress and strain. And we unlock this area, and we create a tsunami, and the tsunami crashes on both sides of the ocean. So if you're thinking, gee, do I know about that? Is that really a thing? Well, you don't remember it in Washington, because the last time a great earthquake struck here was the year 1700. 9 o'clock local time of January 26th. But we have had 2 of those great earthquakes in the last 20 years. Sumatra, great earthquake in the Indian Ocean. 250,000 people killed in a single day from mostly the tsunami, but some of the shaking of the great earthquake. And then most recently worldwide, Japan, 2011, Tohoku, Fukushima nuclear plant. That's another example recently of this locking and unlocking and tsunami. And that's part of our history here as well. So there's a mixture of excitement and, I'll say it, a little bit of dread about what's coming. But the good news is we've made incredible progress in understanding things here geologically just in the last few years. Let's say the last 50 years. So think of the next 50 years and how much more we will learn, because geology is more popular than ever. More and more people of all backgrounds are going into geology, and it's an exciting time for somebody pushing 60 to see the baton passed to this next generation of folks who, if they're willing to work hard and do good science, we can really head in the right direction. We're already heading in the right direction, but we can unlock some of these mysteries that remain. Thank you for listening. It's 9:40 a.m. and this means I have chalk dust on my hands, but it also means I'm ready for your questions, and I will just try to keep this moving as fast as I can. I'll be particularly interested to read questions from people of names I don't recognize so that we can be inclusive for people who are new to us, but I can't be, we have 213 questions, or comments at least. All right. Why does the clockwise rotation stop or hinge in British Columbia? There's a little bit of debate about that. So we're back to the clockwise rotation, and there's this amazing kind of stopping, put the brakes on this whole thing. Like, why isn't it rotating up here as well? Well, first off, the data is still being collected and is still pretty fresh. So it's an accomplishment just to have the data to show that you can see that these yellow arrows are longer than these arrows up here. What are these numbers? Millimeters per year. Right, so there's slippage along the San Andreas Fault here with the Pacific Plate. It moves 51 centimeters per year. 36 centimeters per year, the motion of the Juan de Fuca Plate. 11 centimeters per year, and then you can see we're slowing down. We only have 6 centimeters a year of motion in this vector. And then again, we're not doing it up here. So the answer to the question, at least the leading idea right now to explain that data, is that the clockwise rotation is being driven by the Pacific Plate and the Juan de Fuca Plate. Like, these two ocean plates have grabbed a hold of the edge of North America and have been influencing how they're moving. And by the time we get up here, we don't have much Juan de Fuca Plate left. We don't have a major ocean plate offshore grabbing a hold and lifting or sending to the north. So I'm basically trying to say this clockwise rotation, as we understand it, is because of these two major ocean plates offshore. And if we get too far north, we lose our connection to those ocean plates. Thanks for the question. Oh, this is scrolling on its own, so I'm going to be kind of really randomly going around here. And I appreciate the uppercase, the caps lock, if you're asking a question. It's easier for me to read the questions that way. Are there new volcanoes growing in the Cascades? Yes and no. We know that there's been 40 million years of magma coming up here and fueling Cascade volcanism. So we've had 40 million years worth of volcanoes erupting. But a curious thing that we don't totally understand yet is that after about 2 million years at a time, an individual cone stops erupting and gets eroded away completely. And the magma starts heading someplace else in the Cascades. And a new volcano starts to develop. And it erupts for 2 million years, It erupts every couple of centuries on average. So why is the magma coming up from the subduction zone? Why does the magma keep shifting its location within that Cascade area? I'm not using the board very much. I've got the board. I might as well use it. So in general, we're constantly shifting the location of that magma coming up. But I can't say that we have a new place in the Cascades where there's signs of magma coming up. We don't have any evidence of that quite yet. Thanks for the question. Let's scroll back. Can I? Maybe not. How likely is it for the Grand Coulee and Moses Coulee to landslide down, like the Bridge of the Gods? Is the foundation built the same? Do earthquakes big enough to do it do not reach that far inland? Thank you, Amy. So the Grand Coulee okay, so it's a sunny day out in eastern Washington. It's during the Ice Age, and these are layers of basalt lava. And basalt lava, that thick that we have, the German chocolate cake I'm talking about, the German chocolate cake and the basalt layers are heavily fractured. They're fractured vertically, and if you're a rock climber or somebody who knows a place in eastern Washington very well, out there in the Scablands, you know there's all sorts of horizontal cracks as well. Like, can you see my house? Like there's cracks this way, and there's also cracks this way. Millions of little tiny cracks. And those cracks influence the erosion of those lavas. No, terrible way to say that. Let me try to do it. These cracks are from cooling of the lava 16 million years ago. And most famously, we have these majestic columns sitting there like giant Tootsie Rolls. Okay, the point is, when you bring in a major ice age flood, you create an amazing canyon pretty much at the snap of a finger geologically. That's my left hand. I'm not a lefty. Oh, yeah. So all that basalt is hauled out of there quickly, and we have a coulee, like the Grand Coulee or Moses Coulee, with a flat floor, steep walls, and no river in it. Amy, because there's no moving water today, and even if we have big earthquakes, I see a very low chance of a wall of the Grand Coulee tumbling in. And you're like, well, why did we have that huge landslide at the Bridge of the Gods down the Columbia River? Well, number one, we have the Columbia River continuing to work through there, at least in prehistoric times. Number two, the layers in the Columbia Gorge are not like this. They're layers of lava that are tilted, and it's closer to the trench. Great earthquakes potentially shaking those walls a little bit more. They're all great questions. I won't keep saying that. What kind of magma created the bright purple rocks in Glacier Park? God, it automatically scrolled. Oh, no, there it is. Sorry. Mike, what kind of magma created the bright purple rocks in Glacier Park? Are they in Washington also? Those bright purple rocks are in Washington as well as Montana. And anybody who's been there knows exactly the rocks you're talking about. There's some beautiful colored rocks in Glacier National Park. There's kind of maroons, kind of greens, kind of purples, kind of pinks. I mean, you go to Lake McDonald itself, and there's always beautiful photos looking down through the water of Lake McDonald, and you see all those little river stones, and they're all these amazing colors. You know what I'm talking about, right? So Mike's asking about those rocks. They're not magma. If you remember, I think the first thing I drew was North America and all the exotic terrains that are over here. And going through from Spokane, Washington, clear over to Glacier Park, and running through southern Idaho, and running through the Wasatch. In other words, a whole belt of these rocks, they are coast rocks. Those purples and pinks and maroons are not magmas, but they're rocks that used to be at the beach. And we know that because there are stromatolites, there are mud cracks, there are ripple marks, there's all sorts of beach indicators in those purple and maroon and other kinds of rocks that stretch from BC down to Mexico. That was the west coast of North America for a long, long time. Hundreds of millions of years of time. That was the beach. Where can you find sodic amphiboles in Washington? I don't know. Amphibole is a kind of a mineral. hornblends, amphiboles, but I'm sorry, I don't know. Thank you for the questions. Why is it they call Yellowstone and Hawaiian hotspots, but only Yellowstone is a supervolcano? Okay. Our flood basalts in eastern Washington, the German chocolate cake, is related to the Yellowstone hotspot. But a hotspot is still, even today, a mysterious thing. We discovered hotspots in the 1960s, and there was a lot of excitement. Can you see that yellow dot out there in the middle of the ocean? That's the Hawaiian hotspot. And can you see the yellow dot that's here? That's the Yellowstone hotspot. So the question, I can't remember your name anymore, sorry, Matt maybe. The question is, why would one hotspot make a supervolcano, Yellowstone, and why would the other one not be a supervolcano? I'll do it verbally. There's a major amount of difference between a continent and an ocean floor. The thickness of the crust is different between those two. The chemistry of the continental crust is different than the chemistry of the ocean crust. And so when you're a hotspot and you melt, think like a big welding torch. That should be my prop today. I'm going to go inside and grab a welding torch. I don't have one. But if you heat up with a welding torch a piece of ocean floor, you're going to make a shield volcano in Hawaiian-like lavas, and you're not going to make a supervolcano because the silica's wrong. You're not going to have big explosions. But if you've got that same blowtorch, a hotspot, and you melt continental crust, there's different chemistry, there's more silica, you create these, I gotta go, this thing's blown out in the street. I think I got a lot of paperweights around here. Supervolcanoes are where you have a hotspot burning a hole in a continent, and the result is an amazing caldera, welded tufts. Hang on, hang on. Hang on. Damn it, I had a beautiful welded tuff here. Where'd it go? Here it is. So Matt, or whatever your name was, sorry. This is a piece of Hawaii. This is a piece of welded tuff from Yellowstone. Totally different silica contents, totally different kinds of volcanic rocks. Both are from a hotspot. Yellowstone hotspot, Hawaiian hotspot. I'm having fun. Hopefully you are too. Let's keep it going. I have heard from one of my geologist friends who are now studying his PhD in seismology, slow slip motion earthquakes, about the risk of having a major earthquake due to some faults. What is your take on that? Thank you, Rana Krit. Many of us love science because there's still things we haven't figured out yet. Like there's unsolved mysteries. Like you're in school and you're like, what's this geology thing? Like, I don't know, I'm going to take it because it sounds like easier than chemistry or something. It's like probably, I don't know, we'll talk like about dirt or something. I don't know, probably be easy. And then some of us get into geology. By the way, almost every geologist I know stumbled into it. They didn't go to college to study geology. They tried something else and then they found this geology and like, whoa, this stuff's cool. They didn't even tell me about this in high school. I think part of the allure is things haven't been totally figured out. And if science is presented properly, in my opinion, that's the way to present it. We don't know. We don't know. We need you. We need you to help us solve this problem. So this question was, what about these slow slip earthquakes? a map of Washington, a map of Oregon. What are those, insects? No, those are GPS receivers. We've installed a whole network of hundreds of these GPS receivers. Each GPS receiver is communicating with 3 satellites in space. Every half a second, data from every one of these GPS stations gets pumped into the roof of our geology building, like a few blocks away. Like that's one of our things in our department. We operate the Pangaea GPS geodetic network. We've had this data now for 20 years. The GPS data from the last 20 years tells us that there's a gradual, graceful, clockwise rotation around Pendleton, Oregon. And Western Oregon's moving faster than Eastern Oregon, and Western Washington's moving faster than Ellensburg. And again, it's stopping up here. But every 14 months, pause for dramatic effect. Every 14 months, the rotation stops. And it inches back for 2 weeks. And a slow earthquake is emitted. The energy equivalent to a magnitude 7.0 earthquake is emitted slowly and silently during this 2-week time that these stations stop their clockwise rotation. And then after 2 weeks, back to the rotation. Another 14 months. Stop. Back. 2 weeks. Boom. Go. Rotate again. Da 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 ba. Da 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 ba. Da da da. That's it. And I'm making it too simple. It's not all the stations doing it at the same time, but collectively that's the story. We don't know why this is happening. We don't know how much it's related to the great earthquake story with the locked and unlocked. It's probably related, but the details are difficult. And to the last part of the question, are those 2-week times where we have this stop and go back, is that a more likely time to have one of these great earthquakes offshore? The jury is still out. That's a mystery. And it's not an academic mystery. It's a life and death mystery. Trying not to oversell it, but be nice to know if a 2-week time like that, which we can forecast every 14 months, almost like clockwork, it happens. I don't know. Should I go to Seattle? I don't know. We're in one of those 2-week things. Maybe I shouldn't go. People are working on it. We still don't have good answers. Is there movement or activity occurring in Mount Rainier? Predictions on eruptions. The predictions are forecast. Everybody wants to do that, and it's very difficult. And especially since I'm not an emergency official or not a Cascade Volcano Observatory geologist, it's not my place to forecast. I'm a delivery person. I'm a teacher. I take the scientist's work and I try to package it to a general audience. Is there movement? Yes. Each Cascade volcano has hot liquid rock underneath it. And there's all sorts of James Bond equipment that's been installed by geologists, and their jobs are to monitor these volcanoes and to see those movements. And oh, we got a little swarm of earthquakes. I guess there's some magma moving. I guess there's some swelling of this portion of Middle Sister down in Central Oregon, for instance. So there's active signs in all of our dozen or so active cascades. But it's difficult to forecast the future. On average, we can just say these Cascade volcanoes erupt every few centuries, and that's about as accurate as we can be. It's frustrating. What formed the Olympic Range? How is it different from the Cascades? I'll do it. Gather around, kids. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, 56 million years ago, there was a huge island off the coast of Northern California. We have a name for it now. That island was called Silesia. It was a large igneous province. It was a massive amount of basalt built off of the ocean floor. The total volume of basalt in Silesia dwarfs the amount of volume of basalt that's in the Columbia River basalts in eastern Washington. Silesia was on a moving plate, or actually, this is advanced now. Silesia was straddling an old plate boundary. This was the Kula plate, K-U-L-A, moving to the north. This was the Farallon plate moving to the south. And here comes North America. Here comes Washington 56 million years ago, 50 million years ago. And it's starting to encroach over the top of this spreading center. And Silesia makes contact with the west coast of Washington and Oregon. That's basically how the Olympic Peninsula formed. Mount Olympus is not a volcano. Mount Olympus has never erupted. The bedrock of the area near Mount Olympus, Hurricane Ridge, if you know that drive up from Port Angeles, is basalt that was originally 56 million year old basalt out in Silesia, and it got crammed on. That's a much different story, a much older story than our active magmas coming up and fueling Cascade volcanoes. This is fun. Let's keep it going. Scrolling erratically. I'm just looking at uppercase. I'm sorry if you have an excellent question in lowercase. I'm just not catching it. More of a comment, really. So would it be safe to, Matt, I've already answered. I want to get other people involved, sorry. Will Mazama, quote unquote, crater lake? Hey, Margaret, age 10. Automatic scrolling, Margaret, let me find that. Will Mazama ever erupt again? Margaret, it's a great question. I'm confused about Mount Mazama. Generally, that's me, Margaret. And that's you. You're a normal-sized person, and I'm a freakishly large person. That's you and me. You're 10, and I'm 57. And here's a cone volcano in the Cascades. And a cone volcano will erupt, like Mount St. Helens did in 1980, or Lassen Peak in 1914, etc. But the magma supply continues, and generally these cones, Rainier did this 5,600 years ago, generally these cones then erupt new magma and they rebuild themselves. So cartoonishly, Margaret, we view these cones as being a beautiful cone, and then they lose its top, and then they rebuild their cone, and then they lose its top, and then a few hundred years more, and then they're back to, and then that's the cycle. But Mount Mazama in southern Oregon blew itself up almost completely 7,700 years ago. That's the age of the Mazama explosion, and we have a thick layer of Mazama ash that got deposited downwind of that. We still can find it all over the place in the desert here. It's been almost 8,000 years since that explosion, and Mazama has not rebuilt itself. I mean, there's been a little bit of dome growth. This is Wizard Island, if you know it, in the floor of Mazama. But I don't get why Mazama hasn't rebuilt itself. And more to your question, Margaret, I don't know if it ever will erupt again. I don't even know if the Cascade volcano people I was just talking about are monitoring Mazama. Maybe there is no magma to, I never even thought about that till right now. I should look that up. Thank you for the question, and I'm glad that you're with us today. Do hotspots create spreading centers? Well, hotspots appear to be randomly located. There's been a lot of study about hotspots and to try to explain why they exist where they do. You can have a hotspot in the middle of the Pacific Plate, that's Hawaii. In the middle of the North American Plate, that's Yellowstone. You can have a hotspot at a spreading center, Iceland. A hotspot at a spreading center on the Juan de Fuca Ridge off the coast of Washington, axial volcano, that's a hotspot. But do hotspots cause spreading centers? I've never thought of it that way. You may be ahead of me with that thought. But this is ultimately trying to get to why these tectonic plates are actually moving. And if you read a middle school science book, they say that there's convection in the mantle. And if you take a big pot of water on the stove and you boil that water, you'll get convecting cells, and then the surface of that water will dance around. So the thought is there's convection in the mantle of the Earth, and that's causing this thin skin of the Earth's crust to be moved around. That's not satisfying to me. And I'm not sure I believe it. I'm still not sure we understand why tectonic plates move. We know they move. We have measurements now of all these GPS network data to prove we know what's going where, but why? I'll leave it there. So I don't see a connection between hotspots causing a spreading center. Was Cache Creek pushed in by Silesia? Gene, I don't know much about Cache Creek. Is that up in BC? I don't even know the geography, so I'm sorry. Plenty for me to learn too. What's the time frame where the Juan de Fuca Plate will be completely destroyed, subsided under North America? Hey, my battery. Oh, I'm running low on battery here. We might just go a couple more minutes. What's the question? Did it go away already? Oh yeah. If I suddenly short out, that means I lost my battery in my phone. Gather around, children. Let me tell you a story about the Farallon Plate. 40 million years ago, there was a spreading center out in the Pacific Ocean, and there was a massive ocean plate called the Farallon Plate that was being created at the Juan de Fuca, at this spreading center, East Pacific Rise, really. And this Farallon Plate was moving towards North America and subducting beneath North America. As a result, we had volcanoes stretching from Alaska down to Mexico. Big ocean plate, lots of subduction, massive chain of cone volcanoes all up and down the west coast of North America, like the Andes in South America today. But North America has been moving west. So think of this like a sprinter that's approaching the finish line in the 100-meter dash. Although this is a race, a sprint where the gun went off 200 million years ago and North America started breaking away from Africa. But the point is, as North America has gotten closer and closer to the East Pacific Rise, we still have volcanoes. But starting 20 million years ago, North America started crossing the East Pacific Rise. And so now there's hardly any of that Farallon Plate left. And this little piece of the Farallon Plate that's left is called the Juan de Fuca Plate. That's the one that's subducting beneath Washington. This little piece is called the Cocos Plate in Central America. You can even think of the Nazca Plate as part of this as well. So if we realize that there's this 40 million year drama and North America continues to drift and approach and cross the East Pacific Rise, we finally get to the question, when will we finish the job? When will North America, when will Washington finally cross the rest of this spreading center? I always use the number 10 million years. And by 10 million years, North America will be done crossing a spreading ridge, That means we will have Pacific Plate next to North America. That means we won't have any more subduction. That means we won't have any more Cascade volcanoes. That means we won't have any more great earthquakes. That's all good news. But we will have a San Andreas Fault coming right through this backyard. So we'll still have earthquake problems, but the earthquakes will happen like San Andreas motion in a horizontal sense. Low battery. Okay, I've got a toast for you. I've got a message for you. Can't find it. Must have blown into the Pacific, the Columbia River. We would love to have you back tomorrow. I'm speaking from this backyard at 9 o'clock local time, Easter morning. It's a spiritual weekend for many of us, but in addition to that, I'd like to visit with you tomorrow if you're interested. 9 a.m. Pacific time on my YouTube channel, Nick Zentner's YouTube channel. I won't be coming back here to Learning Geology Facebook. Maybe someday, but not tomorrow. And so, please join us tomorrow morning. We'll be talking about supervolcanoes and more about the Yellowstone hotspot and its details about its influence on Pacific Northwest geology. And if you also go to that Nick Zentner YouTube channel, you'll find all these live streams we've been doing the last few weeks. A toast for you. Here's to Kasim, the godfather of Learning Geology Facebook page. Here's to you and your health and your isolation and your mental health and your physical health and your ability to remain connected to those that you love. Here's to the health of your parents and your grandparents, the health of your children and your grandchildren, all of your extended family. And here's to all of us from distant places around the globe. Amazingly, we can communicate in real time with a guy pushing 60 standing in his backyard looking into a cell phone mounted on a ladder from Ace Hardware. Thanks for joining us this morning. Goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Best wishes to you and yours.